Hello YouTube, welcome to my channel. I'm Bella and today I'm going to be reviewing Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which is the 9th movie by Quentin Tarantino. As we know, it is 50 years since Woodstock, which happened August 15th to the 18th, 1969. Also, it is 50 years since the Manson family murdered 7 people between the 8th to the 10th of August 1969. It is also 50 years since the Altamont Free concert that took place on Saturday the 6th of December 1969. It's also 50 years since the moon landing, 50 years since Martin Luther King got assassinated, 50 years since JFK got assassinated, and obviously his brother, 50 years since Malcolm X got assassinated. In short, 50 years has happened since the 1960s. And here we have Quentin Tarantino's hymn to the late 1960s, early 1970s era. But is it? Actually, it's not. It's more nostalgic about the 1950s, which are the 2 characters played by Leonardo DiCaprio and Brad Pitt, which is the first time they've ever acted together in a movie, by the way, represent. Rick Dalton is the character that's played by Leonardo DiCaprio, and he represents a 1950s cowboy. And unfortunately, during this time in America, America is changing. It's no longer about cowboys and Indians, and the whole thing for Westerns has changed because they've got automobiles now. They've got the colour, they've not got colour TV yet. They've got black and white TVs in their living rooms where they can watch men land on the moon. Science has overtaken them. Frontier life is dying. And that's probably one of the reasons why, with the hippie movement, you've got this whole sort of thing going back to the earth and being very, very living in the now and not worrying about times and dates. It's a reaction to the fact that science is leading America, science and technology are leading America away from their frontier lifestyles. And that's interesting in itself. So you get a lot of what I call nostalgia from the character Rick Dalton, and obviously I forget, it's Cliff. Yes, it's Cliff. The character is called Cliff, and that's Rick Dalton's stunt double. Cliff Booth is played by Brad Pitt. See, I can remember names. Woohoo! Success. And they represent the 1950s. 1950s. That doesn't mean that they represent 1950s values. They represent celebrities of that era. And it's interesting how Cliff Booth, who is the gopher, the fall guy, when he's not doing driving for Rick or being his stunt buddy, he's also helping him around the house. And it's interesting that Rick says, if you want to live and work in LA, you have to have property. That's the first thing I've done, is buy it, don't rent it, you save money. If only he'd done that when he was making his spaghetti westerns in Europe. Anyway, the story is kind of, I don't quite know what to describe the story because it's based on reality, but the ending is not reality. And it's interesting that you have the threat of the Manson family all the way through, but you only ever have one scene featuring Charles Manson himself. And I think that was brilliant because it was almost as if Quentin Tarantino didn't want to involve him at all in the film, but actually he had to involve him when he checks out Sharon Tate's house. Formerly it was Terry Melcher's house, but that's the only scene that you see the character of Charlie Manson actually on the screen. What you do have throughout the movie is this wonderful painted, and it's painted and those neon lights, because remember, 1950s people, throwbacks, but this time it's in colour, which means it's 1960s. You have that wonderful colour portrait of the man with that really, really angry sort of face at Rick Dalton's house, and that is the threat of Charles Manson throughout, so you only have to see him once doing the initial scout out. I thought that was really well done, and actually I thought the ranch was well done, and Dr. Fanning's part was brilliant. Cameos, there are so many cameos in this movie, it's impossible to include them all. Kurt Russell, Al Pacino, the usual gang. In fact, the Quentin Tarantino gang are notified as the gang. We also have a cameo from the daughter of Bruce Willis and Demi Moore, weirdly enough. There are so many, I just can't be bothered to actually list them. You can Google them and find them out for yourselves. It's interesting because here we have a film. Hang on a moment. The joys of an interrupted video, but that's okay because Cliff and Rick are both 1950s. They're characters from the 1950s, but they're in the 1960s. The 1960s is the era that Quentin Tarantino grew up in. The whole film is his love letter to the 1960s, but it's not. He grew up in the 1960s. He remembers certain things, but he obviously dislikes some of the others. It's actually more of a love letter to the early 1970s. I particularly like the fact that we did go to the Playboy Mansion because when it was in its heyday, before it got crass and sleazy of the 90s and early noughties, because it did get crass, it's horrible. But the fact, this was when, you know, proper celebrities were actually attending, and it didn't have that, this is awkward in a post-feminist age type thing. Anyway, but I love the fact you have Steve McQueen explain the whole Sharon Tate relationship thing. That was quite clever. Obviously it is a controversial movie. It is an 18, it is R-rated, people. Come on. But actually the violence was actually pretty minimal for a Quentin Tarantino film. I will say that. But you have to be so careful because some of the people that this film affects are still alive. Particularly you do feel for the daughter of Bruce Lee, who didn't like the way he was portrayed. On a positive, I did like the way that he was portrayed when he was helping Sharon Tate do her stunts. I thought that was sweet because that showed him that he was actually really useful as a stunt guy to help actors and actresses with their physical stunts, and I thought that was good. And I thought that Brad Pitt and Leonardo DiCaprio did a stellar job of actually not beating Bruce Lee in that scene, standing up and saying, no, we don't want him to lose in this, we'll end it at an even thing. And that was only in Cliff Booth's mind that it happened. So it didn't really happen within the reality of the film. It happened in Cliff Booth's mind as a way of, actually, it's good that I'm staying home fixing this aerial. I can understand why Quentin Tarantino did include it, because at times Bruce Lee could be said to have been arrogant, but I can also see from the family side that they don't particularly want Bruce Lee to be portrayed that way, and that's understandable. Quentin Tarantino, he's if nothing but controversial. And there's the phone again. Back again. Okay, hopefully we will get to the end of this video without an interruption. So I've talked about Bruce Lee. Now I want to come on to Sharon Tate, who is played wonderfully by Margot Robbie, and actually this film is more her film than anybody else. And it's quite right that Miss Robbie says that she's the light of this film, because she is. And what I really liked was we had the lovely scene where she was actually, where Margot Robbie as Mrs. Tate was watching her own film, and that was lovely because you actually saw the actress herself, and that will make people want to go and watch her movies, which is really good. And I think that's a great way of honouring somebody who was terribly, terribly murdered at a really, really, really important stage of their life. So I thought that was really lovely. I also liked the fact that there was smoking. I know, what is she talking about? But I think people have forgotten, because we've got smoking bans and various other things, people have forgotten how pervasive it was. I really liked the end credit smoking advert, because I remember seeing those, they were everywhere. Like Camel cigarettes being smoked by a camel. And it was literally so pervasive, you just do not see them now. Now you just see, don't smoke, you're going to get these terrible lungs. They're just not allowed to advertise it at all. And it just showed me like the stark contrast with culture. And I'm pleased that Quentin actually put those references in there. It was also good that he showed the Playboy Mansion in its heyday with actual celebrities there. I thought that was good, which I've mentioned previously. Sharon Tate, I thought she was wonderfully portrayed, both when we saw her watch herself, the actual Margot Robbie playing Sharon Tate, and the actress herself acting within her movie, and also going to the bookstore where she bought Tess of the D'Urbervilles, because that's a hint to the fact that her husband does make a film of Tess of the D'Urbervilles, which I thought was really good. And now we know where he got the idea to make it. Thank you, Sharon. And those little things about people's lives. Rick Dalton, what can you say? He is what he is. And Cliff Booth, I actually found Cliff far more interesting, and his dog Brandy was just lovely. The ending is very controversial, but also quite questionable. It's almost as if by burning the hippies, by burning Tex and the two other girls that came to commit those terrible crimes, in fact they actually hit on Rick Dalton's house, thus saving Sharon Tate, and they end up getting burnt to a crisp and savaged by Brandy the dog. It's almost as if you've got the good part of the 1950s saving us from the bad part of the 1960s. It's interesting, and the fact that they use a flamethrower, which is new technology again. It's like, die, hippies, die. That's interesting in itself. The whole thing is a mirror on that time, and it was a wonderful, wonderful time, because you've got the birth of the Doors, you've got all these new ideas, you've got unregulated drug use, which does become a problem later, hence why we have drug regulation and smoking bans and various other things. But to see all of that hedonism actually there and being, because you'll never get that again, that is like a little time capsule of a film, obviously with a happy ending, and the fact that you have sort of the 1950s, as in Rick Dalton, being reconciled with the new age of the 1960s and early 1970s, when they invite him into the house at the end to hang out with Sharon Tate after he's, you know, survived the horribleness of the failure of the Manson murders that get destroyed. The ending is really quite interesting. The fact that we have triumphed over it, we're not going to give any more thought to what happened. We've moved on, but actually we haven't, because it's 50 years after the fact, and we're actually making a film about it, even though we've just changed the ending. Changing the ending in film does not in no way take away from what actually happened. Check out my review of Charlie Says, because I've got more to say on the Manson family. I'm not going to speak about it more in this video. It was nice to see the fashion. Loved it, loved it. One thing Quentin Tarantino does brilliantly well was the signage. There was all these neon signs everywhere, and the really, really lovely painted visual ones, because you just don't get that anymore. You really don't. You don't get those lovely neon light signs that light up at night. You don't get those lovely painted murals. They're very 1960s, very 1970s, and the reason people had them was everything was in black and white, people. TVs weren't in every household in America. They certainly weren't in every household in England. You know, to read the news, you either had to listen to the radio, read the newspaper, which are either local or national, or go to the cinema, because before you saw the big movie, you had cartoons, news, the B movie, and then your main feature, which could take up your whole afternoon, but at least you knew the news. And that's something that people forget, because before TVs being in people's households, there was only 3 ways you could get the news: the newspaper, the radio, or going to the cinema. And I think people have forgotten that. Anyway, I would rate Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I'm going to give it 4.5, because I'm not quite sure about it really as a film. Its plot was lackluster, but I think it deliberately dips. It's almost as if he's like, yeah, there's a plot here, but we're just going to pace it really slow and get stuck in this ditch. I'm liking the fact that you have the menacing factor of the Manson family when Cliff went to the ranch and he went to check on George, who he worked with, and he went to see him, and he was like, I thought that was really well done. There was some really, really brilliant moments within this long movie, which was a little bit padded, but actually when you are doing a nostalgia flick and you're honouring real life people, you feel that time should be spent. And even though I was sort of like, where is this going? Because it did make you go, where is this going? This is a bit sluggish and slow, which is really odd for Quentin Tarantino. It's almost as if he didn't want to get there. He didn't want to get to his fake ending that isn't real. It's almost as if, please, I don't want to do this. And you could see that. It was, I want to spend more time with these lovely people, these cast of characters, from Bruce Lee to Sharon Tate to all of these people. Because it was almost as if it was like Hollywood honouring the 1960s, because up until that point they've been avoiding it because it's been just so sort of like a car crash of events. Because that's what happens in the 1960s. The 1960s starts on this huge high of peace and love and everything, and then by 1969 you just sort of like crashed out. It's not happened, the revolution hasn't happened, the hippies have all gone either back to work or had to readjust. The 1970s is incredibly awkward with the flares and the weird sort of things, and you've got the young Michael Jackson wearing sunflowers as a Jackson 5 boy. It's odd. That welcome to the 1970s. It is. So overall I'm going to give it 4.75. Yeah, 4.75 of my star rating. That's what I'm going to give it. It's a good film. It does do what it is designed to, and for a Quentin Tarantino film it's got really small violence, only like apart from the flamethrower, minimal violence, but it's still an 18 certificate because it deserves to be an 18 certificate, because there are more, it's very adult, there are adult themes happening, even though it does move slowly. But it's a film about the business, and Hollywood loves nothing more than films about Hollywood. So there you have it, people. Check it out if you are over 18 or 17 in America, because an R-rated movie in America means that if you are 17 and under, you have to go with an adult. If you are over 17, you can see it for yourself. So I hope you've enjoyed this review. Please like, comment and subscribe, and thank you for the support.